Today you're about to hear one of the most intense and unpredictable stories ever shared on this channel. Youssef Al-Rahman, a young Palestinian man, grew up believing that hating the West was a sacred duty, until the day he found himself face-to-face with Charlie Kirk before a packed audience. What began as an ideological battle ended as the beginning of a spiritual war within his own soul. The words he heard that night would echo through his entire life, leading him from a path of hatred and destruction to a supernatural encounter that changed everything. Get ready. What you're about to see is pure adrenaline, a true testimony of confrontation, faith, and redemption, where even the impossible becomes possible. And before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, leave your like, and tell us in the comments which city or country you're watching from.
I grew up believing that the world was divided between the pure and the impure. My name is Youssef Al-Rahman, and for much of my life, I believed that my mission was to defend my faith with all my strength, even if that meant living in constant war against anyone who thought differently from me. I was born in Ramallah in the West Bank, in a home where religion was present in every detail, from the way I was supposed to walk to the things I could or could not think. The sound of prayers echoed through the streets every morning, and the words of the local leaders became law for us. Boys raised to believe that questioning was the same as betraying. I remember the long sermons in the mosque, where passionate voices described the West as the enemy that corrupted the world. I was only 8 years old when I first heard that Christianity was an invention of the weak, and that the followers of Jesus had lost the right to be called faithful. Those words became seeds inside me, and over time they took root. I grew up angry at something I didn't even understand. My father was a stern man. He believed that faith and obedience were the same thing. He often said in a firm voice, "Youssef, faith is war, and whoever doesn't fight loses God." Those words shaped my youth. At 16, while my classmates dreamed of traveling, I spent hours studying religious texts and participating in online forums where young men like me gathered to discuss, criticize, and condemn everything different. It was as if every comment, every debate, was an invisible battlefield, and I wanted to win. Pride became my fuel. I wasn't just another boy with strong opinions. I was the one who spoke the loudest, who had the sharpest arguments, who could silence anyone who dared to question. Logic and philosophy became my weapons, and I used them to disarm others. When someone tried to defend Christianity, I felt triumphant, proving that they were wrong. But what no one knew was that inside, I was exhausted, tired of fighting everyone, and tired of fighting myself. There was a silence that followed me even in my prayers. I repeated words, fasted, followed every rule perfectly, yet the peace I longed for never came. Sometimes I would stare at the ceiling after praying for hours and feel like I was talking to myself. Something was missing, something I couldn't name, and the more I tried to fill that emptiness with religion, the bigger it grew. It was like a hole inside my soul. When I received a scholarship to study political science in the United States, I thought God was sending me on a mission. I wanted to prove to the world that my faith was the only truth. I boarded that plane feeling a sense of purpose, and also a bit of contempt for everything that awaited me. In my mind, I was the defender of truth, heading into the heart of the enemy. But what I found was completely different. The first shock came within the first few days on campus. Cultural diversity was something I had never experienced. People of all beliefs coexisting, laughing, studying together. And the strangest thing, many of the Christians I met didn't seem like the enemies I had been taught to hate. They were kind. Some even invited me to dinner. I tried to make sense of it, but part of me remained suspicious. They must have ulterior motives, I thought. Still, something inside me began to shift. It was during this time that I first heard the name Charlie Kirk. He was known for his firm speeches and heated debates defending Christian values and freedom. To me, he represented everything I disagreed with, and that attracted me as a challenge. When I learned that he would be speaking at a debate on campus, I signed up immediately. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to prove he was wrong. I spent weeks preparing. I read the Quran from cover to cover, studied philosophical and theological arguments, and searched for writings from scholars who reinforced everything I believed. In front of my mirror, I practiced my answers, my posture, even my facial expressions. I wanted to dominate that stage, to show superiority, to walk away applauded. On the night of the debate, the auditorium was packed, bright lights, cameras, curious students, and me, with a heart beating faster than ever. When we walked onto the stage, Charlie greeted me with a smile, a calm, almost brotherly smile that irritated me deeply. He's just a politician disguised as a believer, I thought. The debate began. I attacked with everything I had: historical arguments, philosophical challenges, even personal provocations. Every word was a dart, and I wanted to wound. But to my surprise, he didn't respond in kind. At one point, he looked at me with serenity and said, "Youssef, Jesus taught something you may not have truly heard before." He said, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." In that instant, the auditorium fell silent. I tried to respond. I wanted to mock him, but something inside me froze. The words wouldn't come out. It was as if that sentence had pierced not only my ears but my heart. I felt shame, anger, and confusion all at once. Why did that simple phrase take my breath away? I returned to the dorm in silence. That night felt endless. Charlie's words echoed in my mind like a constant whisper. Love your enemies. I paced back and forth, trying to understand what was happening to me. Everything I had believed until that moment seemed to crumble. Why did it move me so deeply? I didn't believe in Jesus. I didn't even understand Christianity. But something about that phrase felt bigger than an argument. I sat on the floor, my head in my hands, and cried. I cried without knowing why. It was as if years of anger and pride were finally melting away. That was my first spiritual collapse. I didn't know what God wanted from me. I only knew that something inside me was changing, and that terrified me. When the clock struck 3 in the morning, I was still awake. The lights were off and the room was completely silent. That's when I heard a sound. It seemed like the wind hitting the window, but it was closed. The sound grew like a soft whisper. I felt a chill run through my body. Suddenly, a golden light began to fill the room. It was a warm, living light, as if it had come from within me, not from outside. Time stopped. I didn't know if I was awake or dreaming. My eyes filled with tears. And then, a voice spoke. Not loud, but clear, in Arabic. I am the way, the truth, and the life. My whole body trembled. I tried to stand up, but my legs wouldn't respond. My heart raced, and for a moment I thought I was going to die. But instead of fear, I felt peace. A peace I had never experienced before. In that instant, I remembered Charlie's words from the debate. It was as if everything connected. I whispered, "If you are real, show me who you are." What came next was impossible to describe with words. A feeling of absolute love took over me. There was no anger, no guilt, nothing but a presence that surrounded me completely. I cried, not out of despair but surrender. When the light disappeared, I lay still, my heart beating differently. The room returned to normal, but I was no longer the same. Something inside me had awakened. The voice, the light, that peace, none of it could be explained by logic. And for the first time, I didn't want to understand. I just wanted to feel. I closed my eyes and thought, what was that, God? Why me? The sun rose and I was still there, trying to process what had happened. I knew that moment was the turning point of my life, even though I didn't yet understand how. I had no answers, but I had one certainty. Something supernatural had touched me, and no belief, argument, or doctrine could erase what I had experienced that night. What I didn't know yet was that this encounter would only be the beginning of a much deeper journey, a journey that would lead me to lose everything I had, to finally find what truly mattered. The next morning, I was still trying to understand what had happened to me the night before. My mind was spinning in circles, trying to rationalize the impossible. Maybe it was a dream, I thought, or an illusion caused by exhaustion. But at the same time, there was something inside me, something I couldn't deny, an echo, a silent presence, as if that voice were still there, whispering, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I left the dorm earlier than usual. The campus was still half empty, and the morning air carried that cold smell of wet asphalt. The streets were quiet, and every step I took seemed to lead me toward something I didn't yet understand. I took the same path as always to the university, walking along the wide avenue that crossed the campus. And it was there, in that ordinary place, that everything happened. I heard the sound of tires before I saw the car, a sharp, desperate screech of rubber burning against asphalt. When I looked, it was too late. The car was speeding, spinning out of control. People began to scream, and I froze. I felt time slow down. The whole world seemed to fall into silence. For a second, everything inside me screamed, "It's over." I could only close my eyes. And then, a dry sound. But not the impact. I opened my eyes, and the car was stopped, less than half a meter from me, close enough to feel the heat of the engine, the strong smell of fuel, and the tremor of the metal. I stood still, unable to breathe. The driver, pale, got out of the car trembling. He stammered something in English, unable to finish the sentence. The brakes failed. I couldn't stop." He looked at me, then at the car, and said, almost crying, "I don't know what happened. Something made it stop. Something. But I knew. In that moment, I knew. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a sign. I felt a shiver run through my entire body. The same shiver from the night before, when the light filled my room. The same sensation of being surrounded by something invisible and sacred. I couldn't explain it, but inside me a certainty began to grow. I had been spared for a reason. I spent the rest of the day in silence, walking through the university halls like someone carrying a secret the world wouldn't understand. Everything felt different. The sound of voices, the sunlight on the windows, even the echo of footsteps. Everything seemed new, as if I had awakened to a world that had always been there, but I had never truly seen. That night, I returned to the dorm. I tossed my backpack onto the bed, and as I did, something fell out. A small book. When I picked it up, I realized it was the New Testament. I remembered a Christian classmate, a girl with calm eyes who used to sit next to me in philosophy class. Maybe she had put it there without me noticing. Before, I would have thrown it away, but this time I just stared at the book for several long minutes. I sat down, took a deep breath, and opened it at random, without thinking. The page opened to John, chapter 14, verse 6. And there it was written, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." My whole body shivered. It was the same phrase I had heard that night, the same voice, the same words. I let the book fall to the floor and knelt down. Tears began to stream down my face uncontrollably. I didn't know how to pray the way Christians do, but I managed to whisper something between sobs. Now I know who spoke to me. I stayed there on my knees, feeling the weight and the lightness of that moment at the same time. It was as if every fiber of my being had finally found meaning. I knew something supernatural had happened, but I also knew that from that moment on, my life would never be the same again. In the following days, I began to change small things. I started observing more and speaking less. There was a new calm inside me, a silent peace that contrasted with the chaos of the past. I didn't tell anyone what had happened, but some began to notice something different. One teacher asked if I was okay. I just smiled. But that peace, which started as a whisper, soon turned into a storm. Because when the truth changes you, it also starts to disturb the world around you. Months later, I decided to write a letter to my family telling them what had happened. I needed to be honest. I wrote every line with a heavy heart, explaining that I had found something, someone, who had transformed my life. I wrote about the debate, the light, the words that changed everything. I sent the letter and waited. The response came 3 weeks later, not in the form of a letter, but in a short message from my father. He wrote only, "You are dead to us." Those words hit me harder than any physical blow. I stared at the screen for minutes, unable to blink. It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I felt the weight of abandonment, the bitter taste of rejection. I had lost my family. Soon the news spread among the community acquaintances. The Muslim friends who had once admired me now looked at me with disdain. Some whispered traitor in the halls. Others stopped talking when I passed. And there was also fear, the fear that something worse could happen. I began to hide. I moved around frequently, changed my phone number, avoided going out at night. The nights were the worst. Sometimes I would wake up sweating, heart racing, after dreaming of voices condemning me. You've abandoned the faith. God will never accept you. You are alone. Those phrases echoed in my mind like a cursed echo, to the point where I thought about giving up. But it was in that despair that I found something new, or perhaps someone found me. One night, while walking through the streets, I saw a group of young people gathered in front of a small church. They were singing. I stopped, just to listen. It was simple, but there was something powerful in that melody. The voices mixed with a sincerity that disarmed me. I didn't understand the words, but I felt the meaning in them. One of the young men saw me standing and approached. He greeted me with a smile and asked if I wanted to come in. Instinctively, I refused, but he insisted, saying, "You don't need to understand everything now, just come as you are." And for the first time, someone didn't ask me to prove anything, or to justify who I was. They just asked me to come in. Inside, the lights were soft. People were praying quietly. There was something different in that place, and an air of love I had never felt anywhere else. When I closed my eyes, the tears came again. I didn't know how to explain it, but it was as if I had finally found the home I had been looking for my entire life, even without knowing it. After the service, I sat with them. I told a bit of my story, without going into details. They listened to me, didn't judge me, and prayed with me. One of the girls said a phrase that has stayed with me to this day. Sometimes being rejected by men is a sign that you have been accepted by God. Those words broke something inside me. Or maybe they fixed it. I realized that my family's rejection wasn't the end, but part of the path. That the pain I was feeling wasn't punishment, but purification. The following days became a new kind of journey. I still felt fear, still woke up at night, but now there was hope. Those people became my new family. They taught me how to read the Bible, how to pray properly, not as a ritual, but as a living dialogue. And every time I prayed, I felt that the one who had saved me that night was listening to me. But even with this new faith growing inside me, the world around me hadn't changed. I knew the journey would be hard, that there would be persecution, doubts, and moments of loneliness. I had no idea of the battle still ahead. But inside me, a flame was already lit. A flame that neither pain, nor fear, nor abandonment could extinguish. At that point in my story, I still didn't fully understand the magnitude of what was happening. I only knew that the God I had found in the light was still with me, guiding each step, even when everything around me seemed to crumble. And somehow, I knew that the worst, and the best, was yet to come. 2 years passed since that day I decided to say yes to Jesus' call. 2 years that felt like a lifetime. Each dawn was a mixture of peace and danger. I was no longer the same young man who argued in university halls trying to prove a faith based on pride and anger. Now I lived a faith that burned inside me with a force that fear couldn't put out. But with this new life also came the weight of what it demanded. The persecution never disappeared completely. Even in another country, with a new name and a discreet routine, I knew I couldn't lower my guard. Still, something inside me told me that hiding what God had done would be the same as denying the very life He had given me. That's why I began to speak. At first, it was just small gatherings, in local churches with curious young people. I shared what had happened to me, the light, the calling, the transformation. Many listened in silence, others cried. And every time I shared, I realized that something was changing inside me too. It was as if my wound was turning into a bridge capable of healing other hearts. Over time, the invitations began to grow. I started traveling to different cities, giving lectures about religious freedom, about the power of forgiveness, and about the love of God that reaches even the most unlikely places. I spoke with sincerity, without hatred, without vengeance, because I had learned that love is the most powerful weapon that exists. But visibility comes with a price, and one day that price arrived. After one of those lectures at a university in the Midwest, I noticed something strange. A tall man with a thick beard was standing in the back of the auditorium, watching in silence. His gaze wasn't one of curiosity. It was cold, calculating, filled with resentment. At the end of the lecture, while everyone came up to greet me, he simply walked out without saying a word. It chilled me to the core. That same night, I received an anonymous message. The first line made my blood run cold. "We know who you are." My hands started to tremble. I read and reread those words over and over. The message continued. "You can change your name, your city, your country, but you cannot escape judgment." I deleted it immediately, but the fear had already taken root. No matter how much faith I had, no matter how much I trusted God, there was still a human side of me that trembled. In the following days, more messages arrived. Photos of me at events, threatening phrases, insults. With every phone notification, a shiver ran down my spine. I avoided going out alone, moved to a new address once again, and even thought about stopping public speaking altogether. It was a period when fear tried to paralyze me. I prayed every night, sometimes through tears, asking God to deliver me from that shadow. But even in fear, something inside me refused to back down. I knew what Jesus had done for me. I knew how deeply he had transformed me. And within me, a phrase I had once read in the gospel echoed like a silent command. "Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it." And it was precisely when I thought about giving up that something happened, something I could never have predicted. I received an invitation to take part in a national student congress about freedom of speech. There would be speakers from different ideologies, leaders of social movements, and among the names, one made me stop. Charlie Kirk. Yes, the same man I had debated years before. The same man who, with a single sentence, had planted the seed that changed my entire life. I hesitated for a moment. Part of me wanted to refuse, to stay anonymous, to protect my peace. But another part of me knew that this meeting wasn't a coincidence. It was destiny. The auditorium was packed on the day of the event. Bright lights, cameras everywhere, and an intense energy in the air. I went up on stage after the other speakers, my hands cold, my heart pounding. When I began to speak, I looked at the audience and saw, in the front row, that familiar face. Charlie was there, attentive, with the same firm and calm expression I remembered. For a second, time seemed to stop. When I finished telling part of my testimony, without yet revealing the central moment, he stood up. He walked to the stage, took the microphone, and said, "A few years ago, I took part in a debate with a young Palestinian man. I never knew what happened to him after that night. Till now, the audience fell silent. I felt the tears rising. He turned to me and with a trembling voice asked, 'Youssef, is that you?' That was one of the few times in my life when I couldn't hold back my tears. Everything came rushing back. The fear, the pain, the loss, but also the love and the redemption. I took a step forward and said, 'Yes, Charlie.' And that night changed everything. The auditorium erupted in applause. People stood, crying, moved. And there, in front of hundreds of witnesses, Charlie placed his hand on my shoulder and began to pray for me. I felt the same warmth that had once surrounded me in my room, the same invisible touch that had saved me from death. In that prayer, he thanked God for turning what had once been confrontation into communion, what had once been hatred into love. And I understood that the true miracle wasn't the light that visited me that night. It was the love that transformed my heart and was now reaching others through me. After that day, my life took a new direction. The testimony that had once been a secret became public. Within days, thousands of people began writing to me on social media. Some messages were encouraging, others hateful, but among them was something that made me understand the purpose behind it all. Young Muslims from different countries saying that my story had awakened in them the desire to learn more about Jesus. One of them wrote, "If God forgave you, maybe there is hope for me too." I read that sentence many times, tears falling onto my phone screen. That was when I realized the persecution I had feared so much was never the end. It was the cost of a calling. I understood that my pain was saving other lives, and that the fear that once followed me was no longer the same. Now, it was a living reminder that God had called me to something greater. From that moment on, I began to dedicate my life in a new way. I no longer wanted just to tell my story. I wanted to help others who were fighting the same battle I once did. I founded a ministry focused on helping former radicals and people who, like me, were lost between fear and the search for meaning. We helped them reintegrate into society, study, and find a path of peace and faith. Every meeting was a miracle. To see men and women who once carried hatred learn to speak about love, to see tears of repentance turn into smiles of hope, that is priceless. I used to tell them all, I was not set free by arguments, but by love. And that's exactly what it was. No discussion, no theory, no intellectual argument had ever changed me. What transformed me was love. A love that doesn't demand, doesn't force, but simply calls. A love that reached me at the height of my darkness and brought me back to life. Today, I study theology. I want to understand the scriptures in their original depth, and for that reason, I learned Hebrew. Every word I read makes me feel closer to the one who set me free. Sometimes during class I close my eyes and still see the glow of the light that surrounded me that night. Not as a distant memory, but as a living presence that has never left me. When I step onto a stage, emotion still overtakes me. My voice trembles, because every time I say the name of Jesus, I feel the weight and the glory of everything he has done. There is no longer shame in my past, because out of it was born the purpose of my life. And forgiveness, that was the hardest step. For a long time I carried the weight of my father's words, "You are dead to us," like an open wound. But one day, while I was praying, I felt something change. I realized that holding on to bitterness was staying chained to what God had already freed me from. So I chose to forgive. Today, I pray for him every day. I pray for my family, for those who still call me a traitor. I pray that one day they may know the same truth that set me free. Because the love that reached me was never meant to stop with me. It was meant to reach the whole world. And that's what I keep doing, one day at a time, telling the story of a man who once believed faith was war, and who now lives to prove that faith, in truth, is love. But my journey isn't over yet, because every true calling comes with new battles. And I knew that soon another door would open, one that would test everything I believed in, and that would once again show that God never abandons those who trust in him.
And if you've made it this far, it's because this story spoke to your heart. Youssef's journey reminds us that no one is ever too far to be reached by the love of God. He was rescued from a past of hatred, fear, and persecution, and found in Jesus forgiveness, freedom, and true peace. And maybe now it's your turn. If you feel that something inside you is calling for a new life, do today the same thing Youssef did on that night when everything changed. Say with me, softly, with faith and sincerity, I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. This simple decision can completely transform your story. And if you made that prayer, write in the comments, I accept Jesus. We want to pray for you, celebrate with you, and walk with you in this new life. And if you've watched until the end of this video, also write in the comments, I love Jesus. That's how we fill this space with faith, hope, and living testimonies of God's power. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It helps this message reach even more people who need to hear that the love of Christ still transforms lives every single day. And now, get ready. The next video that's appearing on your screen will move you deeply. It's the story From Muslim Billionaire Heiress to Fugitive Christian, the testimony Dubai tried to silence. Prepare your heart, because what you're about to see is more than a testimony. It's living proof that no human power can silence the voice of God. I'll see you there.